evening to all the participants. Well, it's my proud privilege to introduce a distinguished speaker, expert, uh, Mr. Roshan Rai, who is a development practitioner with DLR Prerna, with special interest in participatory governance. His interventions have revolved around inclusions and equity and fair trade movements in tea, conservation interventions, small farmer collectives, samaj, and educational institutions. DLR Prerna contextualizes water security, zero waste, sustainable food systems, and well-being to the Darjeeling Himalaya. Roshan works with Zero Waste Himalaya with a special interest in the intersections of plastic waste and food. He is a member of the Darjeeling Himalaya Initiative, an integrated mountain initiative advocating for mountain sensitive policies and sustainability. Uh, well, I cannot miss the chance to witness all the slides he's going to display, so I'll displace myself from this place and go and sit over there. But before that, let me tell you, it will be an extremely rewarding experience. He is, he knows this part of Bengal, the back, like back of his hand, and as it is, he's an esteemed scholar of nature. So we are eagerly awaiting his deliberation. Thank you.
It frightens me with such introductions as such. I wish I was all that. So, but I am from Darjeeling, so I live in the mountains for sure. Today, I'd like to start off by mentioning a vote of thanks, deep appreciation to CRG for having me across here. While we live in contentious landscapes, I feel at home, and even though I have yet to accept Dr. Ranaviri's think of the membership, I got kicked out because I couldn't come for a lot of meetings, so definitely I'm going to keep there. But more than that, I'd like to express that I am here because Dr. Subhash has been my mentor, but my dad's friend. Right. Yes. Subhash Da is my dad's younger brother. And I lost my father 5-6 months ago. A lot of my politics and a few photographs I take is based upon his influence on me. Having said that, I'd like to kind of also state that the presentation I have here is just experiences that I have had as a person living in Darjeeling, as well as a member of DLR Prerna where I work, and then also, like Sir was saying, members of Zero Waste Himalaya and Integrated Mountain Initiative. All three are civil society organizations. DLR Prerna is a Darjeeling-focused NGO, whereas Zero Waste Himalaya is an alliance across India, Nepal, and Bhutan, really pushing for zero waste practices and principles in the mountains. And Integrated Mountain Initiative is a civil society platform that we are a part of, where we kind of shout out top of our voices to Delhi that we live in the mountains and our mountain specificities must be acknowledged. So what I'm also trying to do is trying to contextualize my presentation here today within the theme that is there. And I have many interests, but I think I would try and kind of restrict myself to what was given to me. I also want to start by saying, even though it's a very micro presentation that I'm trying to do of just Darjeeling town, I stand here recognizing at the present level, COPs are going on, and it's a difficult negotiation. This whole debate about 1.5 is no longer valid. We have countries withdrawing from COPs as well as denying climate change. So it is kind of a challenging space. I'm also standing here on the third year where the GPT failed. Now not Chat GPT, but Global Plastic Treaty failed after 3 years. Hugely disappointed because when it first got talked about, we thought as a planet, as a species, we will respond with global targets and policies that will end plastic pollution, which was the theme. I also stand here as a nation where we are celebrating Swachh Bharat, and Swachh Bharat 3.0 is being discussed, and it's no longer ODF plus, but hopefully things forward. I'll also like to say we are in a challenging policy environment within the waste scenario, with more and more cities as well as regions in India moving towards waste to energy or burning waste. If you environment impact assessments in India, as well as burning of municipal solid waste in coal-fired plants is acceptable. So these are bigger spaces that are influencing where we are and how we are living in this climate crisis. And so while I do agree that we can do as much as we can within our own selves, these are also the larger global as well as national forces that are influencing us. Well, if you haven't been to Darjeeling, and one of the things that you'll constantly find in Darjeeling is, how are you? What's the weather like today? Right? It's always a conversation starter. It is warmer than yesterday or colder than yesterday. It's foggy, it's raining. So I think we as a culture, because of the diversity of microclimates and micro weather spaces that we've occupied at around 7,000 feet above sea level in Darjeeling town, the conversations have always moved around weather, right? It's a very easy topic to open conversations with. But what is happening in the past 10 years or so is that it's not how is the weather, but how different the weather is in the last 10 years or so. You know, so we talk about how Darjeeling, and I know we can't compare with Calcutta. Getting hotter, it's getting more humid, definitely. But what is also very important is that the conversation is around how erratic the monsoon has become, or how erratic the rains are. And the change in precipitation patterns also influence language. So if you again know the Nepali we speak in Darjeeling, we have various descriptions of different types of monsoon rains, you know, and one of the most important rains, the Asar Simsime Pani, is no longer there. So if you ask any of the younger children who've just like, you know, in the last 15, 20 years, they will not have experienced Simsime Pani or even know the word Simsime Pani. When it used to rain, Simsime Pani, it used to rain for a week, constant rain for a week. And I remember one of the big things during this time of the year in school was we used to have this thing called sunshine holiday. Imagine that. So on that month, if the sun would come out, like they would just ring the bell, you'd just stop and run because you'd not see the sun for ages, like, you know. So also the other side of it is we hardly get any snow. You know, so I was in a meeting yesterday and they were saying, oh, what do you want in December? I said, I would love to see the snow in Darjeeling. I haven't seen the snow for a long time. We face Kanchenjunga, the third highest peak in the world, the highest peak in India. We are seeing more and more of the black rock face in Kanchenjunga. You know, so that's where. The other aspect of it is we also had a couple of different types of frost, and we are seeing less of it. You know, frost in itself less, but the different varieties of frost. And then I was kind of thinking fog we don't see. But recently, past 3 weeks, I've been seeing fog regularly in Darjeeling. Very unusual. So in that sense, we are living the climate crisis in Darjeeling, right? It is interesting. I have issues with the climate action plan national level and state level. State level is a hugely copy-pasted job and doesn't make sense. We in North Bengal also don't even know who were the committee members who wrote the action plan, whereas at least for Sundarbans, you actually know who wrote it. It's a thick document. I don't know why it's so thick. Maybe it's just because it's copy-pasted. But then in like around when the first West Bengal State Action Plan was written, it was already talked about that temperatures in the Himalaya in North Bengal have crossed 1.5. So the global debate of 1.5 is something that we are already living it like 20 years ago, you know. So this is like a very problematic space as such, you know. There is definitely documented, past 20 years document, if you read Save the Hills or Visions of Hell or data, we have less number of rainy days. The average we get rain in monsoon is 100 days of rain. Now we are getting the same amount of average rain in the monsoon, but in 80 days, which basically means it's raining heavier and heavier, and the soft rain has disappeared. What is also frightening is we used to get, someone was mentioning about the winter rains, right? We used to get around 3 winter rains. The logic is if we get 3 winter rains in Darjeeling municipality area, we will see monsoon, you know. There will be sufficient water to drink. But that winter rain is going down. So this whole notion with around 2007 that, you know, that the warming in the Himalayas is faster, we are actually now experiencing it. So besides the change in weather, the climate profiles of Darjeeling, we are also seeing phenological changes. For those of you who do not know what that red plant is, or the red flower is, that's rhododendron. And that's anti-mosquitoes in Darjeeling, because now, like 2 or 3 mosquitoes come in our home, whereas I'd never seen a mosquito except when I came down to Siliguri. So it's becoming a common factor that during the year we get mosquitoes once or twice a year. Mosquitoes are not just for humans, by the way. If you have heard about Heliopeltis, it's a mosquito that drinks the sap of a tea plant. Used to be found predominantly in the Duars region post-monsoon. But what happened is with the spraying of anti-malarial thing, it killed all types of mosquitoes, and the Heliopeltis has come back more virulent. And you'll get pretty much in Duars 9 months a year Heliopeltis. But Heliopeltis is being felt in the lower tea plantations of Darjeeling also. So it's not just humans, right? The phenological changes are also challenging because, you know, for example, this year, the highland paddy was about to ripen and it rained for like crazy amounts, 3-4 days, and everything fell down. Darjeeling mandarin is challenged, right? So even the pest and disease profile is changing. And if you look at the other side of that photograph, I mean, maybe you don't see it. Do you see the fan? Yeah, it's like Darjeeling now requires a fan, right? And this is fascinating. Last year, pretty much all the restaurants in Darjeeling invested in fans. And now we are just counting the days where middle class people will also start buying fans for our homes. So like I said, like, you know, this is like we are living the crisis. But the crisis does not come to us isolatedly. It is within the context of our region, 2 districts in mostly a plains state, a history of statehood demand for the mountains, for the hill districts, as well as the biodiversity description of Darjeeling being part of the Eastern Himalaya biodiversity hotspot. So the dominant narrative of, you know, conservation spaces as such. So all this crisis that I'm kind of living is also has to be factored within the larger debate of statehood, autonomy, mountain district, as well as the Eastern Himalaya landscape, which is dominantly forest conservation or tea. So if you do like you were mentioning, right, you did a quick media report. If you do a quick media report for Darjeeling, it'll invariably be tourism or tea or landslides or political unrest. You will not find anything else, you know. So to remind us that we are living the crisis, and it's not just a slow death, but a huge thing, is on 4th October this year, we thought we'd survive the monsoon pretty well this year, you know. Somewhere down the line, Mizoram had early monsoon problems with disaster, and then it moved to Himachal, Uttarakhand, and all that. And we thought the monsoon was over because there was discussion that monsoon is kind of over. And then we got a weather warning. And It was 2nd, 3rd, 4th of October was the weather warning. 2nd and 3rd, if you remember, was Dashami. 2nd was Dashami, and so we took it easy. The rains did not come. It was slight drizzle. Kathmandu, it rained on 2nd and 3rd, and on 4th, it poured in Darjeeling, especially in the Kershang and Mirik subdivision. It poured like mad over 12 hours. I know the rain data presentation is over 24 hours, but pretty much over 12 hours, we got near about 400 millimeters of rain. And that's the devastation. A bridge got washed away, if you saw Dude Bridge. Then this is Siok. And multiple communities in and around Kershang and Mirik, like landslide, just washed away. Discussions with communities have said that this particular river that rose was higher than what happened in 68. For those of you who read Darjeeling history, 1968 was a major big disaster time scale where the Teesta Bridge, Anderson Bridge, was washed away, right? And people recognize how bad 68 was. So this happened in 4th October 2025, and I think the last documented report was there were like over 700 landslides, you know, and there was definitely a brief flurry of social media leaders who came and took photographs of themselves. But the larger debate is how do we really incorporate long-term vision and planning in disaster as such. This is very freaky. I told you 68 was a big landslide event. It was on 4th of October. 2025 was on 4th of October. 2023 was also on 4th of October. So if you remember the Teesta disaster where a gulf happened, South Lonak Lake around 17,000 feet above sea level, burst its banks. The 2/3 of a glacial lake just flooded down from North Sikkim down to Chungthang, which is around 8,000, I think around 7,000 feet, between 7,000 and 8,000 feet, and burst open Chungthang Dam, and the entire deluge of water, 2/3 of South Lonak Lake, and the water from Chungthang Dam rushed down River Teesta, some were saying up to 20 meters in height, at crazy speeds. And they say Chungthang Dam was burst within 10 minutes of the glacial lake flood hitting the dam, and just crashed down from Sikkim, rolled down to Darjeeling, Kalimpong, North Bengal, and the impacts of it is seen in Bangladesh also, right? But what is challenging with this narrative is if you like search for Teesta disaster 2023, it will be predominantly labeled as Sikkim disaster, you know. And then it is described as a disaster that happened once only. The same river did a crazy disaster in 68, but there's description of only the 2023 disaster. So in the global debate of climate financing, where there is discussion around of loss and damage and evaluating loss and damage for the most vulnerable areas and people, where does this disaster fit in? Gulf, you know, is hugely climate crisis induced. But it's not just climate crisis also. Like, who wanted Chungthang Dam to be built at such seismic zones? And I just wanted to correct someone who talked about how the Subanshi Dam is for flood control. None of them are for flood control. They just want to label it as flood control. So the challenge about how do we actually really estimate loss and damage of a disaster event like this is, I think, quite challenging and not fully factored in. Invariably, the disaster is narrated as how many people died, how many cows got washed away, how many houses got washed away. We never look at the ecological damage, and we do not estimate our disaster damages over a longer period of time. 2023 it happened, 2024 Sikkim got cut off number of times, 2025 it got cut off number of times. Because look at the river, look at how big the devastation is. And there are so many indirect impacts, and this particular bridge connects Sikkim with Siliguri, and that's the only highway connection. So now what would normally would have taken 4 hours, the trucks are driving for anything between 6 to 8 hours. And there is actually physical and mental fatigue of truck drivers of Sikkim, and that's not talked about. It drives via a small town called Pedong in Kalimpong. People in Pedong are like just crazy about the traffic because it was a small, like, hamlet or a small peri-urban space or a block headquarter. Now there are large trucks running throughout the night, and people in Pedong say they can't sleep. So how do we calculate that beyond time scales? And so again, there were so-called sufficient disaster compensation in paper, but nothing happened. And disaster compensation was give people a house, give people like a blanket or a couple of livelihood options, but never the larger impact. And also how two states could not figure out. Sikkim called it a disaster. Bengal refused to call it a natural disaster. So it's only labeled as the Sikkim disaster. But then fundamentally, it cannot be just isolated to a phenomenon that for us in the mountains have very little to do, because I don't think we have so much of carbon emission from the mountains, and the entire, the global movement has induced such a disaster. But we also can't fail to question what type of development trajectory have we chosen. Like I said, why should we build such high dams in Teesta? It's one of the most dammed rivers, right? And then why do we need 4-lane highways in the mountains? Along this Teesta now, next to the dam, is the Rampur NJP railways going on, and it went through without an environmental impact assessment because in the name of national security. I am not definitely going to take that train, but we will showcase it as a technological, innovative, infrastructure connectivity project as such. So we must fundamentally ask, what is the development pathway we've been choosing or being forced on us? I was in Himachal 2 months ago. All the 4-lane highways are the ones have broken down. The older ones, which are just small lanes, are all fine. From Darjeeling to Teesta, the PWD old road is fine. It's the big, back-cutting multiple lanes which is the problem. But fundamentally, it's also the question of a transboundary nature. And in India and at the global level, political boundaries are conflicting or competitive. It's never cooperative. And in the climate crisis, it's also about cooperation. So this is kind of setting the larger space of how the climate crisis is impacting big-scale disasters. And from what we estimated is, if you look at the monsoon profile this year, every month there was a disaster across the mountains, across the Himalaya. And in every state, there was compensation given. But the fundamental question, why are we having so many disasters? And also, how do we become more resilient was never questioned or talked about. And there has been rumblings about we have to change development paradigms in the mountains, but I don't see that happening on ground. Having said that, I will come down to the city I live with. And I also find it an important dialogue to bring into India, because the notion of smart city and metros and mega cities dominate the narrative of city or urbanscape discussion. And there is policy debate around it, financial allocation around it, technocratic innovations around it. But somewhere down the line, the smaller cities where majority of urban India also live is not talked about. So debatable. Definitely, Darjeeling is an old post-colonial town now. I don't want to call it town. It's a city, it's really big compared to how it should be in the mountains, because I think the definition of how big a city is also, again, a very plains point of view, right? In the mountains, our carrying capacity is really low, so definitely we shouldn't be having such a big city. Interestingly, planned for around 10 to 20,000 people in the 1930s. today we are definitely bigger than 2 lakh people. And that is officially, we are not counting the tourists who come in, the students who stay there, the rural migrants who come to Darjeeling on a long-term basis, and also migrants from outside who come on short-term basis, and then within that space, there is always competition to get who gets resources for the mountains or the mountain cities like Darjeeling, and we get city investments based upon the official census, which is 1,20,000 or so, and whereas the city holds anything between 2.5 to 3 lakhs, and doesn't help that there is this dream of like flooding the mountains as a alternative to ACs in the plains every summer. So I think that's also something that we have to consider. And finally, the city doesn't stand in isolation. It merges with rural landscapes. And I think that's something that we fail to understand. When we are talking about cities, we talk about the geographic boundaries of cities and forget that most cities tend to merge with rural scapes, and that sharing of resources and services are done by both the rural as well as the official citizens of the city, and also the people who are migrating in and out of the city. Those two photographs are the west facing part of Darjeeling city. The east facing part of the city I've missed out, camera didn't work, but pretty much I've captured the majority of the city. I would say 2/3 of the city. There's a curve around which is not covered. And so this is the southern part, and that's the northern part of the city. So we are built along a Y on a ridge line. Well, let me just focus on a couple of elements only because the topic is so vast, but I hope by talking about a couple of these points that, the discussion around climate crisis and migration and how a city negotiates resilience can be talked about. I don't know if you noticed it. This photograph is taken on the same day with a slightly different angle. This one has Mount Kanchenjunga, which is the water tower, and this is the plastic water tower, right, at the centerpiece of Darjeeling. So hopefully that represents the water crisis of Darjeeling. If you can't see it, yes. Yep. In my house, we have more water tanks than people living in the house. So that's how we are. Also in my house, we can't drive up to our house. So, water has to be carried. So rather than carrying water, we have more tanks than humans. So the non-human aspect of my house. While we are having a crisis, this is also happening. This happened a couple of days before the disaster. That's flood water. Darjeeling, world's nicest place. That's the type of imagery people want to create, and that totally flooded. And this is center of Darjeeling town. So while at one hand we are struggling with deficient water, and this is also fascinating that we don't have data. We have an old 2012 document, and all of us keep quoting it, and it says 1.33 million gallons per day is the water deficit. I don't know how much a liter is in a gallon, but that's the only data. What we do know is there is no water. We don't use water once and throw it away. We'll always reuse it. All our water goes to the toilet or to the garden, or we just use a mug of water, and yeah. So this is two extreme ends. And this water deficit crisis is not something that happened with climate. With the climate crisis, it's got aggravated. We've always had a crisis. It's just that the people who had faced the most crisis, their voices were not heard. But over time, the voices became bigger and bigger and bigger, and so it's become a larger voice as such. I think it's a challenge of design and how we look at water security and water, access and water rights. I feel this is very important because the voices of the people who suffer the most are never heard. So the minute we talk about water crisis, people will talk of water tankers. But I just wanted to kind of then narrate a few points as to why it's also a design fault and a narrative fault, and a narrative that continues post-colonial spaces as such. So if you look at the crisis of Darjeeling, we tap water from around, 26 springs from Sinchel Wildlife Sanctuary, which also is one of the oldest sanctuaries, wildlife sanctuaries in India, around 15 kilometers away. Two lakes were constructed in the 1920s and 1930s by the British, and it taps around 26 springs from the Sinchel Wildlife Sanctuary, collects it and distributes it across the Darjeeling landscape through a series of pipes. And when the crisis is talked about and the X number of gallons deficit of water per day is actually just this deficit. This narrative is a very extractive narrative and does not include the diversity of water sources that people tap from. What is important to note is that Sinchel Wildlife Sanctuary or the Sinchel lakes do not reach everyone in the Darjeeling municipality. So if you look at the other side of it, what you see, those green pipes on electric poles, those are water pipes. Those are private water pipes where people are tapping small water sources to reach their homes. On the other photograph, the bright orange pipes are for tankers to put water into your homes. So if you have the money, you either buy water from a decentralized water source, or if you have more money and need larger amount of water in shorter period of time, you invest in these large pipes and buy trucks of water. So within the Darjeeling municipality area in itself, I'm not talking about outside, Lakpa Tamang, who now I think teaches in Calcutta University, counted more than 90 springs within the Darjeeling municipality. And what we found out is that a large portion of people depend on these springs for water. They don't depend on the centralized water distribution source from Sinchel. And they've always done it that way. It's just that it never featured in the discourse or the water access description in Darjeeling. What is also interesting and important is that Darjeeling municipality does not meddle in the affairs of the springs. It says it's not our business. It's not part of the bigger water distribution plan. The Samaj, or the traditional community-based organization of Darjeeling, manages them. So Darjeeling is divided into 32 wards officially, and within the 32 wards, there are anything between 150 to 180 Gaon Samajas that emerged post-1930s based upon the Gorkha Dukha Nivarak Sammelan, which is a society established by early leaders of Darjeeling to really provide welfare support as well as social sanction to people who are flooding into the Darjeeling Hills. So how do the Samaj manage these springs? It could be open access. Anyone can walk in and out, or it could be only to members, or depending on the season, in the monsoon, anyone can walk in and walk out, and in the dry season, only members are allowed, or in certain instances, during different times of the day, different people can collect water from the springs, as well as maybe washing is not allowed. So there are multiple, and there are very few people who say, this is my spring on my land and I will only use the water, or I will sell the water. That's where the green pipes come from. This is a fascinating spring, Mangalpuri spring. The lady who is sitting, she knows she knows every water container, and so she fills it up and says, okay, this person has filled for the day. The community has given her rights as well as some finances to support her. So there are, like I said, multiple springs, around 90 springs. Some of them are in the heart of town. If you come to Darjeeling, this is just, that is Lal Diki, just above the bus stand. Open access for all. But if you are a commercial water seller, you can only fill up your water at night. This one is Giridhara, which is bang next to the railway station, just below the railway station. Only 2 pipes supply this spring water to houses. The rest people have to line up. Drinking, washing. And that's managed by the Giridhara Gaon Samaj. So like I said, so these are interesting ones. What is also interesting is, this is just above Lal Diki, the other side, is how commercial water sellers are tapping it, and so they sell like each tumbler would have 20 springs. But the crisis is so deep that just below Bethany School, that's the spring which is bang on top of a sewage line, and they pump up the water. So, in this water scarce space, what is happening for Darjeeling? One, we have to recognize, whether be it Sinchel Wildlife Sanctuary water or Sinchel water, or the 90 odd urban springs of Darjeeling, it all comes from the aquifer that is underneath us. It's the groundwater that is underneath us, that is recharged by the monsoon rains, and springs are breakage points in the geography of the land where the aquifer water comes out. We know for now, if there is any disturbance of the recharge, the aquifer levels go down. So the built environment of Darjeeling, or any form of built environment which does not allow water to infiltrate into the aquifer, the subterranean aquifer, reduces the amount of water in the aquifer by reducing recharge. If there is change in green cover, the recharge is also reduced. If you look at old photographs of Sinchel Wildlife Sanctuary, it used to be an oak forest. Now you get a monoculture of dhuppi, or you get a bit of maling, which is a pioneer bamboo species. As the oak trees got cleared off, the bamboo species have taken over and they are pioneering. But what is also important to note is dhuppi, which is Cryptomeria japonica, was introduced by the Britishers to hopefully pack tea chests, and it wasn't good enough. And now it dots the landscape and creates a narrative that whenever tourists comes to Darjeeling, they say, oh, lovely pine trees, let me take a few photographs. You know, it is fast growing, the litter doesn't decompose, and it is, as a monoculture, huge detriment to recharge. But over and above these changing land use patterns has been, with the change in precipitation patterns, like I said, instead of 100 days of rain, we are getting all of that rain in 80 days, and our winter rain is going down. There is less recharge going on because most of the rain just comes crashing down and runs down the hill. We have reduced winter rains, which would really be the life-saving recharge of the aquifers, and snow, the snow melt and the frost melt, which used to recharge, is reducing. So what does it end up being? If we could have people filling up their water in 2 minutes in peak monsoon to 8 minutes in winter, their filling up time is expanding, as well as waiting time has increased. So that's why if you are middle class like me, we have number of tanks. If you are lower income, you invest in this. We have a specific name for it. It's called buldung. Do you know that name? You know, or we call it jerkin, and we were wondering what it means. Jerkin. I think it was jerry cans, you know, so from the war time, you know. But yeah, so this vision of huge amount of waiting line to fill up your water is very common. And there is the reason for it being coming out of our development trajectory, but also global impacts of climate change that is changing precipitation patterns. Well, it is not just about climate impacts and what we have done. It's also about policy and practice gaps. If you look at it, mountain rural springs are the talk of the town. Everyone talks about the Dhara Bikash program in Sikkim, how successful it was, how it started off with Chirag and People Science Institute, Himuthan in the Western Himalayas, and how they figured out a barefoot geohydrological model of recharge, and now it's moved into Nagaland, Arunachal. Somewhere down the line, springs are thought of as water conduits or water access points for communities in the mountains in rural areas only. We forget, like for example, in Darjeeling, it is the Sinchel as well as the 90 springs. There is this imagination in India, or maybe even globally, I don't know, but I'm definitely sure about India, is that most mountain people drink water from the glaciers. Not always true. Glaciers will feed rivers, rivers will feed the plains. Invariably, it's these diversity of springs across the landscape that feeds us. So somewhere down the line, one is urban springs have not gotten focus, as well as the spring rejuvenation work that is happening does not bring in the urban springs into discussion. For example, even in Bengal, through the MG Narega, there was a lot of work on spring revival, but it never brought in the urban space. We still have a water system which is extractive of our landscape. Darjeeling depends on water from Sinchel Wildlife Sanctuary. If you go to most Himalayan cities, they depend on water outside of the landscape. So we somewhere down the line figured out urban people deserve more water and better water compared to rest of the people in the landscape. But within the urban landscape, because of how Darjeeling is very long on a x-axis, on a y kind of thing, on a ridge line, and the development of Darjeeling was focused around the center, around the governor house of 5-kilometer radius. It excludes most of the people outside of the 5-kilometer radius. So while the policy discussions remove Darjeeling from the debate, even Darjeeling municipality discussions exclude a lot of people from the process or water access and water security. But as a landscape, we are definitely extractive of the larger aquifer that is there, because every now and then people say, oh, we must stop illegal lines. The water in Sinchel belongs to us. The springs in Sinchel belong to us. Whereas there are people just below Sinchel called Rongbul town who should be getting the first access to those springs, but we have diverted it out, So I think specifically when we come to the mountains, we do not have appropriate policy, as well as investment that is required. And because investment debate is always based upon population size, no mountain cities will get appropriate allocation of resources, right? If you look at, interestingly, India urban water, there will be urban wetlands, never aquifers and springs. So somewhere down the line, that wetland narrative needs to include these springs. And then finally, there is an extreme siloed option. Forest department, where the Sinchel 2 lakes are there, says forest department is for wildlife conservation, we are not there for water. PWD will say we are there to build the tanks only and the pipes. And the smaller one is the Darjeeling municipality. And somewhere down the line, even within Darjeeling, these three people don't talk to each other. To top it all, Sinchel Wildlife Sanctuary has a tourism point, and the highest point of Tiger Hill is under tourism department, right? And just below that, there is the Sinchel Mandir, which is a very important sacred landscape. It's purely the Mandir. Somewhere down the line, all these different elements that contribute to water security have not been able to sit down. And on top of that, someone decided to make the climate action plan as a copy and pasted job, and we don't even know who they are, So if you talk about Darjeeling water, invariably it's these pipes. right? And imagine those pipes. So that's why today, with increasing water insecurity, our dependence on water is informal in the form of what the man is carrying. And frighteningly, even for the district magistrate office, it comes in tankers. So if you can see, that's the Darjeeling district magistrate office. And it would go into that orange pipe and flow down, you know. So what it needs is a landscape, deep design, including people into the discourse. But what we've resorted to are these. Both of them different forms of capitalism, you know, and sometimes we only blame them as capitalists. We forget those guys on those smaller ones are the bigger capitalists. Trick question, what do you see? What do you see? This is the new Jal Jeevan Mission pipes. This is the old pipes. What do you think this is? Sewage. And what do you think this is? Water pipes, right? So that's how we run. But I do hear a bit of mumbling. That's also plastic there, right? So plastic pipe, plastic water is also there. So for us, I think what we don't really always talk about is water and waste flows together, right? Especially in mountain spaces, because water flows its natural path, which means we can push our waste down that natural path. And so the Darjeeling town is dotted with these examples of how these two elements interact with each other. So I cannot not talk about the waste crisis. And this is how we manage our waste in Darjeeling. And you might be wondering what's the whole role of talking about waste in climate space. Waste is climate crisis inducing. And we have a failed, broken system to respond to it. And I'll just throw this idea to you and see where it goes. So pretty much this is how we manage our waste. Slight difference, this is from end of last year. We've moved it further down because to push it down was too difficult. And we also got a support from NMHS to look at legacy waste. So they're trying to change this without changing the basic system of management and shifted it further down. That's one lucky part of mountain policymakers. If there's a problem, shift it further down, shift it further down. Well, for us at Zero Waste Himalaya, waste is a production issue. It's a production crisis. It is a consumption crisis, but it's a dominantly production crisis. They are pushing more waste on us. We are buying too much. But why are we buying? What are we buying? Because we've been told this is what we need to buy. And for us, from a climate point of view, from a zero waste point of view, from a real solution point of view, from a sustainable point of view, if we do not end production, we will not end the waste crisis. Production also is climate inducing because there is extraction there, processing, transporting. Like, can you imagine the carbon footprint of these edibles? Like, it's frightening, if you look at it from that angle. Whose lives are we really damaging producing it? Where are we extracting it from? And then it comes to a mountain city like Darjeeling and we are left with this. And then everyone says, Darjeeling is dirty. There's litter everywhere. Litter is just one manifestation of the crisis. So I would like to say the hierarchy should be production crisis, consumption crisis, and then only a management crisis. If you look at waste from purely or from a management cycle point of view, we are missing the larger debate. It's like, saying, let's stop climate change, but keep on extracting oil and investing in the fossil fuel industry. I'd like to argue saying this is also predominantly fossil, and this is what it shows. We've been part of a movement called the Himalayan Cleanup since 2018, where we acknowledge that we can't clean up a mess, but we can use it to reflect on the waste we generate. So what we do is we clean up an important socio-ecological point for, let's say, half a day, and then for half a day we waste and brand audit the waste that we clean. And this is only for solid waste. What we found out is that in key socio-ecological spaces, and this is not domestic, 95% of it is plastic waste. And of that, 75% plus is non-recyclable plastic waste. We've been told that plastic is a consumer habit problem, that if you recycle it, everything will be fine, but no. Himalayan cleanup clearly states us, and we've been doing it since 2018 across the Indian Himalayan region. We must have done with like over 60,000 volunteers, over 1,500 sites every year in May. And our analysis shows every year the amount of non-recycled plastic is growing. And it corroborates with the global data where, if you look at 2017 data, it says all the plastic that was ever produced globally, only 9% has been recycled, right? So that's where me becoming a bit, talking about the other side of it. What is frightening, what we've been finding over the last few years with the cleanup, is that waste and food intersect is really big. Of the entire cleanup that we've been doing since 2018, and I'm just here since 82% in 2022 was food and beverage packaging, 81% in 2023, and food packaging contributed to 84% of all plastic waste we audited. And of that, 2024, 71% was non-recyclable. Today, we are in a non-communicable health crisis in India, right? Diabetes, type 2, like you name it, obesity, hypertension, all the things that we shouldn't be having, which is food and lifestyle oriented, comes from what we are eating, and then we are also contributing to the plastic waste crisis that we are experiencing in the mountains. And, you know, it also challenges other sides of it, right? Who's growing our food? Who controls our food? Because we are what we eat also, right? And we are eating predominantly ultra-processed food. And if you start like searching for ultra-processed food, every day there will be one article which says ultra-processed food is bad, but it does not link to the plastic waste crisis. There will also be tons and tons of articles about the plastic waste crisis, but they will not link it to the food we eat. And what we are seeing with the Himalayan waste crisis and the Himalayan cleanup data is that that intersect is real, and we have to look at it from that point of view. So basically, flipping the narrative of waste being just a consumer behavior that needs to improve, what we are talking about is that producer responsibility must be there. And if you look at waste policies, plastic waste policies of India, extended producer responsibility 2022 clearly states that companies must take 100% responsibility of the plastic they generate. Sadly, it doesn't reach the mountains, because the target, even though 100%, is geography neutral, and it's also brand agnostic, which means they will collect and fulfill their targets pretty much in areas which is easy to pick up. So difficult geographies like coastal areas, mountain areas, small villages are always left out with the high amount of plastic trash. So this larger systemic change that is needed is also very important, and also the reason why Darjeeling is labeled as dirty and with a water crisis. While I was talking about solid waste, liquid waste is also something that in the mountains we haven't talked about it. And in increasing climate crisis with changing waste temperature profiles, precipitation profiles, this is inviting disaster, you know. So the narrative this morning about Assam tea and cholera, we are living it. Like, I wrote it and I deleted it out. I was about to say, I want to write it as it's the shit flow diagram of Darjeeling. This is a visual narrative of it. Do you know what I'm trying to show in that like vertical photograph? No. Oh, that's the bazaar septic tank. Like, what has happened is, because the town has grown and there were 5 septic tanks designed for Darjeeling town during the British era. But as the town grew, people just broke the pipes, runs 24 hours openly, and then the septic tank now has become a playground. Well, I don't know how Calcutta manages your liquid waste, but this is how we manage our waste. So, so cities are not just extractive, it's also destructive of people downstream, right? We should be most responsible. We are district headquarters. Neither are we managing our solid waste, neither are we managing our liquid waste. We are just letting it flow down. There is also this romantic notion that during the British time, the Britishers kept Darjeeling clean. One, during the British time, there was no plastic waste. There was no excessive production. Secondly, even during the British time, the 5 septic tanks during monsoon would have released their liquid waste down into the stream. There are stories where downstream Bijanbari, when the siren used to run, villages would vacate for a couple of weeks because all the shit of Darjeeling would come rolling down. So for me, while I'm engaging in this discussion or presentation around living the climate crisis in Darjeeling, I'd just like to propose also a few recommendations and thoughts that I think are important as we talk about this. And then I see similarities when you talk about the Calcutta wetlands or the landfills in Delhi, or like I was thinking through when you're talking about the mangroves, I was wondering how much of plastic must be stuck in those mangroves, right? And those dots have to be connected. So for me, when I'm just going to try and close this presentation, is waste is not just end of life management issue. For far too long, and I saw that waste was discussed in the Calcutta Climate Action Plan, it has to be brought in from a larger lens of intersect. Climate discussions have to include health, and it has to include both physical and mental health. It cannot just be removed, And also, I think growing body of evidence as to our physical health and our mental health are connected. And the food we eat also contributes to our physical and mental well-being. It's also about livelihoods. Like, standard question, how many of us would know people like them in first name basis? Right? Waste definitely is about food and nutrition, because what we eat comes ultra-processed, hyperplastic packaged. It is impacting agroecology, as microfibers, microplastic, nanoplastic are flooding our agricultural landscapes, but also how much of plastic is being used in the agroecological systems. It is impacting biodiversity. All of us would have seen that crazy video of the straw out of the turtle and the plastics out of cows and elephants in Uttarakhand, and now recently tigers playing with plastic. And then waste is equally about the climate crisis also. So waste is not about the Conservancy Department or Swachh Bharat. It is about the climate crisis also. So the water security discussion in Darjeeling municipality has to have a dramatic change in vision as well as narrative. It cannot be of the visible aspect of water only. We have to acknowledge the invisible that is below us. And I think that is something that all of us will be challenged in the days to come, because I was just reading up on how many of the Indian cities are sinking because of our extensive groundwater extraction. Guwahati, I think, is facing similar issues. So for the mountain cities, unless and until we do not talk about water that is above, that is visual, that can be seen, and the aquifers below us, we will never have water security. And to be really climate resilient, with that lens, we have to look at the landscape also. We have to have conservation and recharge plans. Water security is not just about tapping water resources, but ensuring that there is sufficient water underneath us. So, by default, these are green spaces in Darjeeling. Jalapad becomes a powerful cantonment area. Jalapad is all about national security and not about water security. That's Mahakal Mandir, all about religion and going to heaven or moving on to another better plane, not about water security. That's the zoo and the Mountaineering Institute, about species, non-human species, and climbing mountains, not about water security. So unless and until the defense, the Mandir Committee and the Forest Department and the Mountaineering Institute come together to talk about water security in Darjeeling with the Darjeeling Municipality, PHE, and the community, long-term climate resilience and water security will not be there. But fundamentally, all these three departments have different visions. We have to recognize the decentralized spaces or the 90+ urban springs of Darjeeling, and the departments have to go beyond silos. And I think that's an important aspect, because invariably water then becomes just Jal Shakti and they just don't talk to others. But fundamentally, I think climate resilient planning and action has to be integrated to city planning, and it cannot be a copy-paste job. It has to really look at lived experiences and taking it forward. And I think we are great as a nation to copy-paste plans and keep it as that. I mean, one of the biggest challenges of climate action plans is, one, we don't know who made it, and we don't even know which department should own it, and how the multiple departments who are supposed to be looking at it has allocated resources, both financial and people, to take it forward. Forget the politicians who are not even educated by the scientists and bureaucrats about this, because they think they will not understand. But I think a lot of times climate experiences are lived experiences, and for us people living in the mountains, we are talking about it. It's just that if you show me a 3D model, I will not understand. It also then needs to incorporate some amount of traditional, but as well as individual level actions like these. Do you know what that is? Exactly. So very simple, and people do it, but you can improve on the design. For waste also, I think, because I belong to Zero Waste Himalaya, we definitely talk about decentralized models. Not to forget, definitely individual institutions must take responsibility of reduction, segregation at source, improve collection linkages, but really engage in constant knowledge building. If you look at Swachh Bharat, our knowledge building has been one poster or one celebrity brooming the street. And it has not talked about, responsibilities and daily engagement, because waste is something we generate every day. But we've come to realize more and more it is a production issue. We have to take producers to be responsible. We are blessed with extended producer responsibility policies. One of the few nations globally to kind of experiment on it, challenged, but at least we do have it, and we need to make that more viable. Actually, it will be quite interesting. Just look at extended producer responsibility fake certificates. It was such a big scam. Like, there were companies just selling fake certificates, to the companies. And finally, waste is a design fault. It is problematic if you think about it that way, that we buy a product, use it for 2 minutes and throw it away, right? That is a fundamental design problem, and so it has to be. So if they can research and design to create a chips that is wavy, crackly, with lines, and send it up to Darjeeling, they can easily figure out a packaging material that does not pollute the mountains. But I think we are also in India blessed, and we have proud spaces that we should be occupying. And occupying really circular economy, low travel distances, local markets, eating local is one of the biggest things that I think we can do. So I think for us, at the crossroads of Darjeeling. We are further challenged with the water crisis and the waste crisis, with the experience that we are living with the climate crisis. And the question is, do we continue to zoom forward like that, or continue to think that the waste is just managed by a person on a truck? Or do we do something seriously that recognizes our mountains? Thank you for listening, and I'm open for questions.
Well, it had been a wonderful deliberation, and there'll be pretty many more questions from the participants. Okay, that will begin. But let me tell you, Darjeeling had been the queen of hills. So it's really pathetic. People who travel there these days, it's so crowded, it's polluted. In fact, in Chowk Bazar areas, you will find tears run down your cheek because it's so polluted. It has become a pretty ordinary place, but Darjeeling had been almost next to heaven for us. Anyway, now the floor is open for questions.
Hello, sir. Thank you so much for your presentation. Sir, since you mentioned loss and damage, I actually worked in on loss and damage in the Sundarbans. So I wanted to ask you about COP29, where the Loss and Damage Fund was operationalized. If you could reflect on what that means for India or for Darjeeling, whether it at all has an impact or will have an impact. Thank you.
Thank you for a very enlightening presentation. Although you come from a mountain city and I come from a coastal city, a lot of the slides that you showed are very similar in both areas, especially when it came to water security. Same long lines, same city depending on water coming from other parts, brought in by pipes, where we have actually deprived a lot of villages around Mumbai of their own water, and we pull it all in, suck it all in. There is so much of inequality of water distribution in my city, which is very well known, because I have worked in slums for the last 20 years, and majority of these slums, of course, many of them are unrecognized. Water is not provided, and people end up paying anywhere from 25 to almost 250 times more than what I pay. So this water security is not necessarily only a mountain or a Darjeeling problem. My question was, when you were looking at a lot of these tankers, we have the same issue in Mumbai, because Mumbai is sinking because of all this water being pulled out. But is that what you're facing in about Darjeeling also, when so many tankers are pulling the groundwater?
I have a question about people who work in waste, with waste. And I don't know why this has never occurred to me before, but most colonial cities, we know, waste workers, sanitation workers had been brought from elsewhere, and people of specific castes. So I wanted to know, is that the same thing for Darjeeling, and how are they? And it's clear that people who work with sanitation are perhaps the most dispossessed people, but are there also religion and caste markers for them?
Next round. Okay.
Sure. Thank you, sir. Loss and damage, I think that was the first time there was a kind of attempt to make a financial consideration, right? But I think the other side of the loss and damage discussion was for most vulnerable communities and vulnerable regions to climate change. So I think for us in India, we need to start recognizing who are the most vulnerable and who are the most vulnerable communities and vulnerable regions as such. Somewhere down the line, a lot of our decisions are political and not really measuring what is vulnerability, right? So I totally recognize Sundarbans to be extremely vulnerable.